What's up, guys? It's Madison, and today I'm just here with Max. Max is the client who's been through my coaching programs, and Max is just here today because he's super interested in the work. He's done it. He's been there, and we're just gonna have a conversation today where Max is gonna ask me about some of the deeper things that I teach, that we've gone through together, and just explore some of the topics that I'm sure all you guys are also super interested in. So thanks for being here, Max.
Yeah. My pleasure, man. All right, let's get into this.
Great.
Madison, you've been a huge proponent in helping me move forward in my life in a spiritual way. I actually was told by my therapist that I should get in touch with a spiritual advisor of all people. So for those of you who don't know what you do, for the people that are watching, how would you explain to the layman what you do?
Sure. So I'm a spiritual advisor to entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I do is I help them go within and actually uncover all the hidden subconscious blocks, the emotional blocks, the mental blocks that are keeping them stuck and from keeping them back from actually succeeding in their business. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times entrepreneurs, they're so focused on the external world. Hey, I'm having a problem with my business. It must be the sales team. It must be my employees. Right. It must be everything but me. And yet it's often, it's the captain of the business that often is really the bottleneck.
Right.
So everyone else gets blamed, but it's really the leaders, the entrepreneurs of their own business, particularly solo entrepreneurs, right? If you are the business, well then your mind is the most important thing running your business.
For sure.
Your mind isn't, doesn't have clarity. Your heart isn't centered. Well then, how do you think your business is going to be?
Right.
So entrepreneurs, they come to me often when, sometimes they're feeling stuck or in a rut, or they've been stagnant. They've been making 40, 50K a month. Why am I not a 7-figure entrepreneur yet when I'm not doing 8 figures? And it's often there's something within them that is keeping them held back. And so my expertise is actually identifying what that is. I'm really good at reading energies. So when you talked about, kind of maybe, spiritual energy coach, that's really my expertise, is really looking at someone, talking with them, and kind of using my natural abilities. Maybe some people call them psychic or intuitive or medium. But really,
because I noticed something different about you when I met you. I was like, there's something different about this guy. He's got some sort of magical powers over here. And you were like very cool and confident about what you did, but you weren't overstated or like salesy. And I was like, there's something to this guy. He knows something that I don't know. He's tapped into something. So
yeah, a lot of clients, they tell me, Madison, things about myself that I never even knew. And that's where I come in handy for most people, is it's so hard to see our blind spots.
Yeah.
Even me, that's why I've hired coaches, But really somebody who can actually, really look at you and scan, your emotional energies.
Yeah.
How are you, by emotional energies, it affects everything. If we're holding suppressed emotions, it affects how we speak, how we carry ourselves, our posture, how we walk. And so I spent my entire life studying this, developing, working with so many people, and it's become so easy for me to really identify what those things are. But more importantly is actually to help people move past them, to let them go. And when they do that, that's when they have these incredible breakthroughs, because they don't have those hidden weights that they're not even aware of, weighing them down, holding them back.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because we call it a spiritual practice. Like, people refer to you as a spiritual advisor. And what would you say makes your work more spiritual? Like, why do you think people call it spiritual? And because sometimes I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, when people hear the word spiritual, they think like, oh, that's kind of woo-woo. That's not going to work on me. There's an element that seems like ethereal. It's not practical. It's not real. I can't really put my hands around it. So I don't know if I trust it or believe it. Like, I think people have that misconception when it comes to spirituality or just hearing that word. But real quick, when I started working with you, I was like, no. There's like a big psychological component to this as well. There's a big emotional component that's very grounded in reality here. But yeah.
So I got multiple responses to that. So one is like, a lot of the work I do is a healer. A lot of people, they call me a healer, because a lot of the work I'm doing is I'm healing all these emotional traumas that are just affecting us. They're in our body, they're weighing us down, they're affecting the racing thoughts in our mind. Those thoughts are the ones that we're manifesting in the world, that we're putting into our business, and that we're speaking to our loved ones and our coworkers and all of that. So the healing work actually is spiritual. So what we're doing is we're going in and releasing those trapped emotions. And when we do, we need to learn certain lessons. So, for example, I have a lot of executive CEOs, and they're always frustrated. And but the thing is, they haven't learned a spiritual lesson yet. They're carrying this emotion, and that emotion has a lesson behind it that they need to learn to overcome it. So they've been frustrated for 5, 6 years, with their business, and everything in their business is frustrating. And they're wondering why. And they say, oh, my employees are doing this, the accounts are doing this, and everything is so frustrated. And what we do, is I show them that the outer world is just a mirror of their internal state. So I help them let go of the frustration and see actually what would patience do for you and your energy. If you could let go of frustration and stop suffering your own anger, right, your own poison, what would that do for you, and what would that do for everyone else? So as different entrepreneurs, executives have become more patient, crazy enough, they say, Madison, my business is flowing better, I'm flowing better, because those internal blocks are the same external blocks that are affecting everything else.
Right. But what would you say is under, or if there is anything under that frustration? Like, is there generally something you find when you work with people that there's something under those sort of more surface level emotions?
Sure, there's always something. So frustration is an impatience. It's a type of anger. And beneath anger, there's always another emotion. So someone is just feeling. A lot of times I work with entrepreneurs who actually sometimes they feel helpless or hopeless. They feel like they're running the ship of the business and just them. And everything is so frustrating. And oftentimes, when we get back to the healing work, that's actually how they grew up. They often, these really incredible geniuses that start these companies, often they had these family upbringings that was how they felt all the time, that they had to do everything themselves and go to the best schools and start a company at a really young age and be in the Forbes 30 under 30 and all that stuff, all the accolades. And the whole time they felt frustrated that no one was supporting them, helping them.
Right.
And crazy enough, they manifest that same work dynamic when they grow up. They manifest it. They manifest business partners that abandon or leaving them or are not helpful, and employees that are not helpful, and all that kind of stuff. So when we actually work on the spiritual healing lessons, the dynamics, sometimes it requires we go back to early on and let go of those patterns and actually help them let go of those underlying emotions. Sometimes it's helplessness or
I love that.
That's when they're like, oh my God, I just had to learn that lesson.
Right.
Otherwise, they're just putting on the gas their whole life, expecting different results. It's the same thing over and over. So the spiritual aspect fits in because I help them learn the lessons.
Right.
A lot of people have gone their whole life without learning. Well, what's the lesson you keep repeating?
Right.
It's like a snake, there's a picture of a snake's tail that keeps eating itself. And it just goes around and around and around. And a lot of people, 20, 30, 40 years of this, and not actually learning the lessons and leveling up.
Right. So I'd be curious to know, what are some other major things people come to you for? And then I'd imagine once you get into the work with these people, there's actually something that's, often deeper than what they're actually coming to you for. So would you say there's sort of like a common theme? I know you work with a lot of men, in particular you work with women as well, but I know majority of work is with men. Is there a common theme with men that you find in terms of what the actual core sort of traumas or blocks are?
Yes, a lot of men come to me, really successful men, and they're doing really, really well with money. A lot of times the relationships are a bit iffy sometimes. And
like their romantic relationships?
Romantic relationships, but nonetheless, all of the relationships, it's going to be the same, And when we really, really go deep within, why are they, some of the guys I've seen, they're incredibly good looking, very handsome. All the girls love them. Even women ask me for their numbers, like, who's your clients,
Oh, why, thank you.
Yeah. And they do, though. And these are very successful guys, financially successful. They have the money. They have the looks. They have great bodies. This is all the stuff that if you go to Instagram, they're going to tell you, as long as you get those things, you're going to have all the girls in the world. And yet they don't. Or if they do, they attract really terrible women for themselves. And likewise, the women, same problem, but with really terrible men for them. And that's why. Well, it's because they're attracting that.
And what is it usually? What's the predominant emotion that they're attracting?
So the core wound that most people are completely unaware of, even if I were to tell them, they would just deny it or have no conscious awareness of it. It always goes back to this abandonment trauma. A lot of us experience this early on. It's almost baked into the society. We get out of the womb, they cut the cord, they take the baby away from the mother, and right then it's that initial connection to earth, to the motherly energy, is already severed from a young age. For me, it was kindergarten. I was, shipped off to kindergarten. Mom leaves. And obviously as an adult, this is all innocent, it's all well-meaning, but as children, it's devastating for us when, our parents leave us. And why abandonment is so threatening to a child is, well, it's this primitive trauma that runs through our blood, through the DNA. And if you were to be abandoned as a child, and let's say it was 2,000 years ago, well, you'd die. Children cannot defend for themselves. So the way this actually manifests going up into relationships, whether it's their business relationships or personal, is that often they attract partners that are quick to abandon them. So we attract things in our life that are there to teach us things. Sometimes that's painful. So a lot of these guys with these abandonment traumas, they attract these women that often they cheat on them, they leave them, treat them terribly. Anything to help almost move that emotion up and out so they can feel it and heal it. But most men are so cut off from their emotions that they have no idea, that are so blocked off and severed from their heart, which is where the actual trauma is itself. So it's a double whammy, that they can't even feel what is the real problem for why they manifested this life for themselves.
Right, but usually, like you said, it's those core traumas around usually abandonment. That's the big one for men.
I've 4 years ago I started a men's group. I was one of the first people where we live in the Mexican Riviera to do this, and I was about 95% of the men had this trauma. I'd say probably 99% of my clients have this core trauma, and it always manifests itself with a whole bundle of other traumas. Children that feel abandoned, they blame themselves. They say, well,
self-abuse.
Mom, dad left, therefore it's my fault. They blame themselves. I got to be better. I got to be perfect. I got to be the best. I got to be good. So no one will ever leave me. So a lot of these A-type personalities, they're flooded in the business world. These hyperachievers. And they love this term. You say, oh yeah, I'm a hyperachiever. I'm ambitious.
Yeah.
But often the times it's this survival energy.
Right.
And it goes so deep.
Right.
Unless you really do this deep work to really see within yourself, which is what I help people do, to reveal that, it'll be running you your whole life if you are not consciously aware of what is subconscious.
Yeah, Madison's helped me a ton, by the way, for those watching. Madison's helped me a ton in terms of helping me remove my own sort of heavy anchors around, my childhood and even into my teens and my adolescence. And that's another thing. Not all our traumas and our blocks, I've learned from Madison, necessarily come from a very young age. They can happen at any point in our lives. But I wanted to sort of switch the conversation around to therapy, because I've done therapy in my life, and I can honestly say working with you is nothing like therapy. And it's been, not to knock on therapy, because I loved my therapist in the past and he helped me understand myself in a lot of different ways, but I felt like I can only move the needle so far, right? I felt like there was only a certain sort of pinnacle I could reach with therapy, and I think what I was searching for personally was, I knew there was more potential within me, and I knew I had a lot more freedom to unlock within me. I just kind of felt heavy and stuck in a way. And I was like, there's so much more in here, but I'm just blocked. Like, I just knew subconsciously I was blocked somehow. Anyway, what do you think about that idea that I just said, and therapy in general, and the difference between your work and doing something like psychotherapy?
Yeah, so I'm well positioned to speak on it. So actually, my father is a psychologist, and he's an executive coach, but he's well trained in therapy. My uncle's a therapist, my aunt's a therapist. My whole family is nothing but therapists, right? So growing up, right, all these books were around the house. I understand therapy, and I went to therapy myself. But the most interesting thing that I noticed, the way you were using your hands, right, it was like you were pointing to the body the whole time. I have all this stuff within me, and you keep pointing to your heart, your chest, which is where the potential is. Now, therapy, again, it has its place, but I initially, I had to move on from it because I also got stuck with it. But therapy is it's head-driven. They call this top-down, where it's all this mental games, trying to reanalyze what happened, the stories, and sometimes we get stuck there in the head, and we don't really, move past those stories. We don't realize that we are the awareness that is watching the stories. We are not the stories. We're not the one suffering the stories. That's the ego.
Right.
Again, to the spiritual part. Now, getting more to the important part, where my work lies, is it's more in the body. So all these emotions, they're trapped in the body. And so, before I had my whole kind of traumatic accident where I learned all this, I was a programmer. And so, I learned to program, and often I see it the same thing. So all these emotions I spoke of, the abandonment, sometimes there's certain fears, angers, impatience, not good enough. There's all sorts of emotions. They're all stored in the body like a computer program. And they'll control our thoughts, over and over again, because that emotion is just stuck vibrating in the body. So when I work with you, right, it's like I'm always asking you, where in the body is it? And then we actually help remove it. It's a very physical thing. It's emotions. We think of them, this is a ephemeral thing. It's in the head.
Yeah.
It's in the air. Well, no, it's within us. Often they're within our heart. They're in our hips, our shoulders. We say this all the time. We carry the weight of our world on our shoulders. We carry this in our jaw, and we do. So when we actually kind of work with the body and the mind, that's when we really get to unlock all these programs, let them go, delete them, and what's left is the most beautiful thing, which is you.
Amen, brother. Amen, brother. Yeah, no, totally. And I always say this to you, especially recently, is you can't outsmart your body. I thought about that. Yeah, go me. I thought about that. You can't outsmart your body, because even something we were talking about earlier today in our group call around mantras, like you can tell yourself, I'm the best, I'm amazing, and you can kind of chant mantras in the mirror to yourself, and you can trick your mind temporarily, but there's no tricking that emotion that's trapped in your body. So that's where I look at your work and say, this is where like the deep work is, and like we need to go inward. I know for me personally, I did all these things externally to try to heal myself and try to better myself, and some were helpful and some are healthy, like getting on a good diet or trying to be more disciplined, meditating, exercising. All these things are good, but I never really went within, like actually went within. I did all these things externally to make myself try to feel better within, but I didn't actually really get to the core, to the root of it. And that's what your work is, right? That's how I see it.
Yeah, well, we're both wearing black, which is, I'm very particular, but most clients know me, like everything is a symbol. Everything means something. So like, Max and I were both wearing black today, and black is, most of my work is, we work in the shadows. So like, it's kind of like Carl Jung's terminology, but the subconscious mind, the shadows, all the parts of ourselves that we leave behind, whether it's the emotions, our strengths, our weaknesses, our gifts, we throw them in the back, to hide it from society so we don't get hurt. But this work really is, it's the shadow work, it's going in and finding those lost parts of ourselves. Usually goes back to the abandonment too. We abandon ourselves and abandon our voice, our power, our gifts, whatever they may be.
So can you give me an example of like something, an emotion, a common emotion that people avoid, that they don't want to tap into, and once they do tap into that emotion, what are the benefits? What can happen?
The number one emotion I see with entrepreneurs that almost all of them have, and like, you don't need to be like a psychic to know this, but it's just this early trauma of not good enough, of worthless, of at some point, whether it was the parents, the school system, the media, which is always, all the marketing nowadays, the whole point is to instill this idea that you're not good enough. You don't make enough money, you don't have the right abs, whatever it is. Therefore, you're not good enough until you buy my product. And so what we're doing actually is we go to that core emotion of not good enough and we release it with these entrepreneurs. What happens to them is they 180 the entire self within and their entire business. So when we're opting from a place of not good enough, we're in survival. Because anything that all of that fear of failure, of trying to be perfect all the time, we're all just trying to avoid that feeling of not being good enough.
Right.
And if we're not good enough, well, what's going to happen to us? People will leave us, we'll get abandoned, we'll die. So that's it. Always, all these fears, they always go back to death, of course. That's why it's the primordial fear. But yeah, most entrepreneurs, even the most successful guys, 7-8-figure entrepreneurs I work with, that's the core trauma they've been running their whole life. And it's like a fire under their ass.
Right.
And a lot of times they'll take pride in it and brag about it. And, oh yeah, my basketball coach told me like I was a piece of shit. Then I decided for the rest of my life, I'll basically make up for it. And I built this great company. And it's like, well, that's great that you used that in that way. But the problem is, do you want to use the rest of your life operating from that same energy of not being good enough and trying to prove to everyone else otherwise? Or would you rather just let that go, realize your true value within, and operate from a place of creation and fun and just letting everyone else know their worth?
Hell yeah, man. That's great. That feels great to hear. Even just you saying that feels great. It makes so much sense. But also, what I also wanted to get at was you maybe trying to describe the science behind the shadow work. So, okay, so we have this, we identify this sort of trauma in our body, this block in our body about not being good enough. And we, part of the work that you do, and maybe you can get into this, is you help people, you show people how to let go of these traumas. I mean, that's really the crux of your work, is you give people a number of different incredible tools, and you guide them through how to let go of these traumas in their body. It's really incredible stuff. But what is it? Why is it that when we accept, not resist, but we accept these, and you can talk about this process a little, letting go process, but why is it when we accept these emotions of not being good enough, why is that, how is that helpful? Like, why is that helpful? Like, what's the science behind that? If you can sort of put it into scientific terms.
That's a very good question. I mean, what we're doing with our emotions all the time is we're pushing them down. We'll do anything to push them down. We'll overeat, we'll overwork. Most of the guys I do this overwork. They use whatever, sex, anything, television, scrolling on social media, just to push those emotions down. And so those emotions, though, they get stuck in our body. They're not going anywhere. And so when we ignore them, we distract from them, we push them down, what we're doing is we're resisting them. We're resisting facing them. And the way that emotions actually process, you can think of emotions as energies of emotions. And those energies, they want to let go. That anger wants to leave your body. So does that fear. All of those early emotions, they want to leave. The tears want to come, all of that. But we actively and subconsciously, we avoid it, we push it down. So what we resist persists, right? If we did tug of war right now and we're resisting, it's not until I let go and you fall back that I win. So often what we need to do is actually we need to surrender and let go. And that's what my process is it's called the letting go process. So when we let go, actually, that's when we allow things to flow. And that's when things can pass through us and we can free ourselves. But we don't know that we're holding on and resisting. And people wonder, why are they so tense in their body? Why does their throats, tighten? Why is it, the hips, and they have all these physical problems, the psychosomatic issues.
Yeah.
Well, they're holding all this tension and contractions in their mind, which is reflected in the body. And until they learn to actually let go and surrender and de-stress, then all of that emotional energy will be stuck in the body, tormenting your spirit, your mind, your body.
Right. There's a real freedom that you experience when you accept these darker, these negative emotions, and you just accept them and accept that they're a part of you, because the good and the bad, they're all a part of us. And the way I look at it as well is we're not running away from ourselves anymore. We're not running away from our shadows. We're fully accepting who we are. And the more we fully accept who we are, and like you said, we don't resist who we are and resist our emotions, the more comfortable we can be in our own skin.
Absolutely.
Right? So.
Yeah, you can't be comfortable in your own skin if you feel all this in your body, right? It's like guys, I used to coach a lot of high-ticket sales guys, a lot of guys in the dating world, right? The pickup game. And, they're always scared of this rejection emotion in their heart. And it's they walk up to the girl, they're on the sales call, and immediately that heart contracts.
For sure.
And it's trying to, prevent them from feeling that early rejection, hey, your product sucks, or, you're not a good looking guy or whatever. And they're trying to say the right thing, with their words, manipulate them. But in the end, there's just all this wall up against being rejected. But what if instead of, learning all these defenses, we just went straight to the root, we let it go. Maybe it happened a long time ago. You released it, and you can walk up to that girl and make that sales call, and there's no fear left. There's nothing within you to be triggered.
Yeah.
There's nothing on to knock.
It's interesting. I remember when I first joined your program, I started working with you. I watched one of the testimonials, Josh, our friend Josh, and I remember Josh saying, it was like after he did a lot of this work with you, it was like an anchor was lifted off of him, and he was able to just go into, because he's in sales, and he just went into his sales calls so much more freely. Like, it's almost like if you're not worried about the outcome actually becomes better. And there's more opportunity for you, right? When you're just like trying to hold on and manage and control, then we're stopping opportunities from coming our way.
Exactly, it's tiring.
You're not tied to the outcome.
Yeah, it's also exhausting to be controlling all this to hold it down. Maybe we don't even know that we're, holding this down. A lot of guys, they come to me and they lack energy. You see it in their eyes, you see it in their expression, their life force. The energy is dead. And well, it takes so much energy to maintain energy. It's a physics thing. To push that down, that it's exhausting. And they find themselves oversleeping, taking meds, whatever, drinking lots of coffee, worse, drugs to get more energy. But when you're a child, you got nothing but energy. And then eventually you learn to push all that stuff down and you don't know who you are. And it takes a lot to hide yourself from the world, to hide your light.
Yeah.
So when you liberate that, people, they call this work energy work because you raise an energy. When you let go of those anchors, those fears, all those lower emotions, well, you have so much energy because there's nothing weighing you down. You're just the light.
Totally. It brings me to my next question, which I was going to say, maybe not as light as my other questions, but maybe light because it's kind of, we can look at it in a funny way. You don't know what I'm going to ask you. It's not that big of a deal. But I noticed that, me included, a lot of men in particular have difficulty crying. And I know part of this process as well, it's like, there's different ways to release emotions, I've come to learn. Sometimes it's through yawning, sometimes it's through just like your body's releasing. You can feel it come through your feet and your head. You can feel it as a burp. Sometimes I'll just like burp. But a lot of it's through crying as well. And I notice a lot of men, including myself, have blocks around crying. Do you find that? And if so, why is that?
I've rarely worked with men who could just cry, purely from the get-go. It's always one of the first things we address because, we need to let go of those energies, and crying is a great way to do that. Well, what happens is men are severed from the heart at such an early age. The heart, particularly one of those emotions we carry, is that abandonment. And we have so much, that wants to protect this heart. So the heart is, it's how the emotions are the language of the heart. So if we're not in touch with our heart's not open, then we're going to be in our minds, where most men are. They're in pride, they're in ego, they're bashing each other, but they're not in their hearts. So the first goal is to open the heart. And when we do that by, actually examining their beliefs about crying. I tell them, hey, well, Peyton Manning cries, when he wins the Super Bowl. A lot of the best men in the world, they're crying all the time. Tears of joy, sadness. It's a natural human emotion. So when they're resisting that within, they're resisting themselves. They're at a war with themselves. So when they find peace with themselves, they're not at war. And they break past all that conditioning that our society, particularly Western society, has been so harsh on men not to feel emotions because it's weak and, it's not strong and all of that. We let that go. They can finally, for the first time, let that out. And when they do, they become strong. And they're not acting on pain. They're acting on pain in their relationships, in their business. They're not carrying all of that. And they're just themselves.
And they're not real. And they're not acting. And that's the key word. They're not acting, right? So many men, I feel like, have to put on a face or feel like they have to put on this face to be tough or be strong. Like you said, a lot of it's pride and ego. But like we talked about earlier, that requires a lot of energy and effort to do.
Yes. To put on a mask is exhausting. I did it most of my life unconsciously. We don't know we're doing it.
Right.
All these titles we give ourselves. I'm CEO, I'm a father, I'm an executive, all this. We put so much energy into this. But in the end, we are what we are. We're just being. So when we really, our ego just loves these identities. But in the end, we just are what we are. We're not better, not worse. We just are.
It's beautiful.
So a lot of this is spiritual work, because when you let go of these ideas, these false beliefs, these notions of who you think you are, well, now you're like, well, now who am I? If I'm not all these titles, if I'm not all the things people told me, then who am I? And so the healing journey is a journey coming back home. And, it's coming back home to the heart, coming back from, we went, when the heart was severed as kids, we went to the head. The head was safe. We could imagine there. We could be in fantasy. We could be in ego. There's no pain up here. And so many guys, they're walking around in their heads, but the path back home is to be back in their hearts. But there's pain to go back sometimes. And that's the journey that, I take people on through the darkness, is going back to some of those traumas, those pains, moving to that dark forest. And when you do, you get to the light, you get to who really you are, which is the love within.
Yeah, totally. As we continue here with this interview, I might just ask you some personal questions in terms of like, what I'm curious about, what fascinates me and what I'm curious about that can potentially help me on my journey as well. I guess the first thing that comes up now is this, like, why don't we let go? Like, why is it so hard to let go? right? Like it sounds so easy. And when you talk about what you do to some people, they might think, well, okay, so just let go. That's your whole thing. It sounds easy. And in theory, it is. But why don't people just do it if it was that easy?
There's all sorts of hidden payoffs to holding on. So in order to let go of something, we first have to know that we're holding on to something. So we could take anger, right? A lot of guys, they come, this person did this, my employee did this, and I ask them the first question, well, how does that anger make you feel? Well, terrible. I feel exhausted. It drains me. Okay, so you suffer, basically, right? You're suffering because of your own emotion. And then, to ask them, is the anger helping them? Is this helping the situation? Well, not really. They come to that conclusion. But I ask them, well, what are you getting out of this? This is really the core question. What's the payoff? And if they're really honest with themselves, they'll say, well, I feel like I'm in the right. I'm justified to say this. It feels good. Maybe I feel revenge. But then we got to ask, well, is it worth it? Is it worth it to hold on to that emotion? And once they ask themselves these questions, they inquire. They say, okay, there's probably a higher path. Same thing with fear.
But why does it feel good to be angry? Like, why do people want to hold on to anger? Because it does kind of feel good to be in the right.
There's all of these little payoffs that our mind would love to have, It would love to hold on to anger, to lack forgiveness, just because we think that we're going to smash the other person, by emotionally blackmailing them, hitting them with our anger. But the reality is they don't suffer nearly as much as you do, right? And so people, they might hold on to this anger their whole life, being angry at their coworkers, their parents, and yet their whole time, their heart's being blocked because of it. And they attract people with that same frequency to help engender and get out that anger. And until they actually let go, they're always going to suffer. It's the same thing with fear. Why hold on to our fears? It's best to choose love than fear. Consciously, you might know that. Yeah, I don't want to be in fear. Well, I ask people, well, what's the payoff? Well, it's safe. You don't have to try. You get to be small. You don't have to do anything. You can be lazy rather than actually work through your fear. So there's always hidden payoffs. And you'd be surprised, or we're all surprised about how kind of petty your mind is, what little things it'll take,
It's crazy when you really think about it. Like, it's just like, why am I holding on to this? Like, I'm holding on to this thing that is making me suffer, and it's so unconscious. That's the thing. It's so unconscious. But I think about it like, what was I holding on to for a long time? I was holding on to a lot of fear. And when I asked myself, like you said, it was like it kept me safe. Like when I really asked myself why I was holding on to certain fears, it made me feel safe. So, yeah, like you said, there's a payoff, but
the craziest shock, we talked about not being good enough earlier with entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Well, why would anyone hold on to a belief that they're not good enough? That's just completely not helpful at all. Well, rationally we know that, but why does everyone hold on to it? Well, the reality is the ego mind would prefer to have an identity than it would to not have one at all. It would prefer to be small, useless, a waste, than it would be to let go of that identity and the fear of what would happen next. What happens next is they find the real self, that infinite awareness behind the emotions, beyond the identities. But sometimes it's a scary jump for people, and they'd rather hold on to these lower ideas about themselves than to make that jump and see who are they really.
Right. So what is it like? That's a big one for people. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. You hear that all the time. What is that? What is that emotion? Like, where does it come from? And what is that? How would you describe that feeling?
So emotions, they're all energies. They're energies, emotions. Where do they come from? Well, literally our whole society, like, it's very hard to grow up in our society and not feel good enough. The teachers, like, you didn't get the right grades, you didn't do the right in sports. Like, at every turn, you're going to feel not good enough, because how could you be the best in all of these things? And particularly, U.S., Canada, North America, we're so, it's so ego-driven, right?
Yeah.
And the fundamental emotion behind ego is it's that fear of not being good enough.
Yeah.
And so we swing from one end to the other, from not being good enough to being in our pride.
Yeah.
And I'm better than you. The reality is we're all created the same. You might actually be better at basketball or better at scores, but it doesn't make you actually better or more valuable than somebody.
Right.
But we fall into this belief. And if you buy into that game, you're screwed. because you'll spend the rest of your life trying to defend it,
Right.
defending your ego and living in fear that you're going to fail. But if you know your deep worth and you really know it,
Yeah.
and it cannot be severed, and you really own that, and no one can ever touch that, what's there to fear? There's nothing.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're just you. You're in creation. You're a being.
Yeah.
There's nothing to defend. That's it.
Right.
And it's so strong.
It is strong, and I also feel like I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I'll have these feelings more and more now of like everything's going to be okay. Like, doing this work made me feel like I can have my own back more, if that makes sense to you. Like, I have my own back. I feel like no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay because I'm more okay with myself. And I think removing these blocks and becoming more comfortable with yourself allows you to be more free in the world, be more creative, take more chances, because you're not upset or you're not as triggered or emotionally rattled if you fail or you get rejected or if something doesn't work out. And we have all these fears and blocks from trying and doing and creating when we're blocked. But once we start removing those, and feel like no matter what happens, if I try and get rejected, that's okay, because I'm going to be okay and I'm good with myself. Like, there's something very freeing about that.
Most of our fears are just our fears of feeling our emotions.
Yeah.
If we fail in business, the date fails, what we're really afraid of is how we're going to feel. And most of us have so little training in our emotions. You know, our parents did teach us how to deal with our emotions, like our teachers did, that we have no idea how to handle the stuff within. And we think, oh, if something happens on the outside that makes me feel a certain way, I won't be able to handle it. I won't know what to do. But if you just become, an emotional master, you can go in within and preemptively do all that work and let it go. Well, then there's nothing to trigger you. There's no rejection. There's no fear. And at that point, you're just running with the wind. There's nothing stopping you, because the only thing ever stopping you was yourself. And you get past your own fears of feeling. It's infinite.
It's infinite, man. Yeah, it really is infinite. Oh, I mean, there's a lot I want to ask you, but I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot, and you've covered a lot about what you do. Maybe you can talk, if you want, a little bit about your journey. Actually, what I'd be curious to know, because I don't know if I've asked you this, but like, what are you working on right now? Do you still feel like you have work to do personally?
I work all the time on myself. It's it's a lot of healers, they get into this because they needed to. It wasn't like a fun thing to do. It wasn't like, I can't wait to go work on my trauma. It's you're kind of gonna get pushed into it based on the gifts and the lessons you were given at a young age, which is actually the traumas.
Right.
And by naturally working on them, that's how you learn to become a healer, really, to help other people.
Yeah. So you're constantly doing work on yourself.
It's constant. The other day I did like 4 hours of just letting go of more and more pride. I was such traumatized at a young age that I went from my heart to my head. And this isn't like, malicious pride or like, hurtful pride. It's just when you live in your head for so long and you've been away from your heart, it's a constant journey to come back, to drop away from this mental world. I used to work in information technology, software, and the whole thing is nothing but mental.
Yeah.
I went to some great universities across the world, but it's all mental.
Yeah.
It's all intellectual tests. They never say, well, it's never about your heart, You never have an SAT and it says, what does your heart say?
Pride's an interesting one though, right? Like the idea of pride's interesting, isn't it? Like, you don't really think about that as something that you need to let go of or release. Pride is I think sometimes mistaken as a good thing. Like, he has I take a lot of pride in what I do. Like, you hear that term. Like, I'm really, being proud and prideful are two different things, but people will say that. Like, I take a lot of pride in my work. I take a lot of pride in my relationships. I have a lot of pride around certain things. So, can pride be a good thing?
Never. I think our society is so far off and lost that we don't even know better. But, religion nowadays has been so scratched, and modern people, a lot of the modern people just don't even want to think about it. There's so many great nuggets that come from it, within Christianity. I mean, obviously we're Jewish, but there's the 7 sins, and one of which is pride. Falling from your own pride. So the thing about pride is, we can't see our own blind spots. If we're so prideful of something. Pride is always identified with something. If you're prideful about anything, about being tall, about being successful, well, you're always going to be fearful of people attacking that pride. What comes up must come down, right?
So that goes back to you being tied to your identity.
Exactly. You're always going to have to defend your
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah.
And our modern day is people are so obsessed with what they identify with.
That's really interesting. But I do think we can distinguish between pride and being proud. Like,
Different, yeah.
right? There is a difference.
Pride is mental. Proud is
Yeah.
from the heart.
Yes.
So when we're proud of something,
distinction.
it's a self acknowledgement. That's great to acknowledge yourself and how far you've come, what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
Pride is, it'd be proud would be like, I'm so glad that I did a great job. That feels great. Pride would be like, I'm the best ever. No one can touch me, right?
Right.
I'm the best there ever was.
You see a lot of athletes in pride.
Huge.
And pride can be a great motivator, as can anger. A lot of these lower emotions that we talk about, anger, pride, fear, they can push people, they can motivate people. And I think a lot of people get stuck in those lower emotions because they're used as fuel, but they're not necessarily healthy. Like, you'll see really successful people, you work with a ton of successful people, they're very successful and they've used this fuel to push them forward, but deep down, they've got a lot of trauma and a lot of unhappiness.
A lot of people, you can look at the Elon Musk of the world, right? It's all pride. They've been running on that their whole life. But it's like, hey, would you put the shittiest energy in your Lamborghini? No, you wouldn't.
Right.
What if you could put love and joy and excitement and passion inside your Lamborghini and putting the coal of fear and shame and guilt, being motivated by that? And most entrepreneurs, it takes them a while to acknowledge, well, what really are your internal motivations? Where are you coming from? Often they'll sell themselves on some, with a lot of Silicon Valley guys. Well, I'm going to change the world and everyone will benefit on this new software and so forth. But when they get past the self-denial and realize, well, we're really just doing this to make up for a lack of self-worth, then yeah, things start to change when when I help them make that switch.
Right.
But it requires that we're just brutally honest with ourselves at first, and that's
Right.
extremely hard for most people to do. And
It is.
they would rather die and go to their gravestone than to acknowledge that first.
100%, man. What do you think about when people say, what do you think about the term happy? And just like people say, I just want to be happy. What does that mean to you?
I think happiness is an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So like, a lot of the work we do is we call it alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
So like, sometimes it's like it's like, hey, it's magical, this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we let go of one thing, we get the opposite. We alchemize it from
Mm-hmm.
one thing to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to alchemize sadness, you get happiness. If you learn to go within and literally feel all the sadness that you ever felt, and it might feel like there's a lot, but if you actually do the work, maybe it takes you a few hours, days, depending on what sadness has been in your life, and you actually feel it, you will feel happy. When you let go of that, you will feel the opposite. When you let go of pride, you feel humility. When you let go of fear, you feel courage and fearlessness.
Yeah.
So the way to these higher states often is just to let go of the opposite, really. To swing from one end of the polarity to the other.
Yeah.
So I think happiness is a fair emotion. I think there's even better, higher emotions than happiness that most people are not aware of.
Interesting, because that seems like in like the mainstream society definition of the highest emotion, it's happy.
Sure.
It's like, I just want to be happy. And you hear parents say that to their kids all the time. Like, I just want you to be happy. Like, that seems to be the highest emotion. But I know working with you, there's a lot of levels and a lot of depth to it. And there's things like joy, I feel like, is above maybe happy. Maybe it's on the same wavelength as happy. And then there's just sort of presence.
Sure.
Presence.
Yeah.
And enlightenment. That's one, right? Those
A
are
lot of people come to me, really successful people, and they say, Madison, my business is great, my relationship's great. What are you going to do for me? And they say, I'm happy already. And it's like, but they don't know how good it can really get.
right.
They don't know that there's levels to this game.
Yeah.
The spiritual game, it's like a video game. There's levels.
Yeah.
And maybe you are quite satisfied with your life, and that's fantastic. But there's even more and more work to be had, even more infinite amounts of love to embody, to give, to be, to explore. I would say love is probably the most profound emotional state we could be in.
Right.
But happiness, in retrospect, it's nothing compared to the power of love.
Yeah. Totally. You know what's an interesting thing to talk about as well that I wanted to chat with you is judgment. Is because we talked about this early on when I started working with you about when we're judgmental of others, that's usually a reflection of our own insecurities or the own things that we need to work on. What do you think about that? Like, how do you look at judgment? So if I look at someone, I'm like, like I can't believe that person's doing that, or like, you know, like, oh, like that really, like he said that, that's so cringy. Like, is that usually a reflection of me if I'm thinking that, or someone if they're thinking that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, like some of the, we always introduce these kind of spiritual elements, these lessons. So one of these ideas being that, there's this mirror principle that every single person in a reality, whether they're walking past the cashier register, your employees, they're all mirroring us, some aspect of ourselves that we can't see within ourselves. And so, if we do judge them for something, we're judging ourselves too. It's a mirror. Jesus says, hey, how can you, say what's in his eye, but not see what's in your eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
It always comes back to us, always. And whatever we don't accept within somebody else, well, how are you going to accept that within yourself?
Mm-hmm.
If you say, this guy's, he's too loud, well, now you're judging the idea of being loud.
Mm-hmm.
So you can never yourself be loud and be expressive and be big. So judgments, they fundamentally, all around, I guess we can use them in certain ways to discern, but in the end, they hurt us more than not. So a lot of times we got this kind of judgment detox and like all this stuff. And yeah.
That's interesting. Guys, if you want to, change your lives, maybe you should get in touch with Madison. Madison works with, in all seriousness, Madison works with mostly entrepreneurs. I know you work with all different types of people, but mostly entrepreneurs. We've talked about this. It's mostly growth-minded people who, because I think that's ultimately the first step. You have to really want to make a change. And a lot of these people who are entrepreneurs or growth-minded, we'll call it, they want to make a change and they're willing to do the work. And that's one thing I noticed starting to work with you. It's like, you need to want to do the work, and that's really it. You just really need to want to do the work and be committed to getting better. And that's a fucking awesome thing to commit to. Who doesn't want to commit to getting better? But if you're really committed to it and you really believe in Madison and this type of work, then, you should get in touch. And yeah, it's been awesome talking to you, man.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and for, being so curious about the work and for being such an incredible client in my coaching program and for continuing to, push yourself and clearly, push other people to learn more about this and we're curious and want to grow as well. So thanks for coming on and it's been a great time.
For sure. My pleasure, man.